The very top of the Great Pyramid is flat, not pointed, flat. If you climbed to the summit of the largest pyramid on the Giza Plateau right now, you would not stand on a peak. You would stand on an open platform of bare stone roughly 30 feet across, wide enough to park a truck on. There is no tip. There is no point. There is a missing piece the size of a small house. And the stone that once sat there, the single most important block in the entire structure, is gone. Not damaged, not cracked. Gone. And for a monument this precise, a building leveled to within centimeters across acres of ground, a flat top is not a small detail. It is a wound. Something was supposed to be up there. Something was designed to crown it. And the deeper you look into what that missing stone actually was, the stranger the answer becomes. Because here is what almost no tourist standing at the base ever realizes. The pyramid they are photographing is not finished. It is not even the shape it was built to be. What they are looking at is a skeleton, stripped of its skin, beheaded of its crown, worn down by time, and carried off piece by human hands. The Great Pyramid we see today is smaller than the Great Pyramid that was built. And the part that vanished first, the part that disappeared so long ago that people were already asking about it 2,000 years ago, is the top. Today, we are going to go through exactly what once stood on that summit, why it was the most valuable and most meaningful stone the Egyptians ever cut, who carried the rest of the pyramid away, and why the official story of a simple stolen capstone leaves the single biggest question completely unanswered. Stay with me, because the thing that was supposed to sit up there was not just decoration. It was the whole point. Most people who visit Giza never think about the summit at all. They photograph the outside, they ride a camel, they leave. They see a mountain of yellow-brown blocks stepping up toward the sky, and they assume that is how it always looked. It is not. Most people walk right past the real mystery without ever knowing it is there. Because the strangest thing about the Great Pyramid is not what is inside it. It is what is missing from the very top of it. And the fact that it has been missing for so long that we may never know for certain what happened to it. Let me give you the shape of the problem first, because the numbers alone should stop you. When it was completed around 2560 BCE, for a pharaoh named Khufu, who ruled Egypt during the 4th dynasty, the Great Pyramid stood 146.6 m tall. That is roughly 481 feet. It held the record as the tallest structure built by human hands for nearly 4,000 years. Not the tallest in Egypt, the tallest on the entire planet. Nothing anywhere surpassed it until the cathedrals of medieval Europe, and even then, only barely. But measure it today, and the pyramid comes in at about 138.5 m, around 454 feet. Do the subtraction. More than 8 m of the pyramid, roughly 26 feet of its height, is simply not there anymore. That missing height is not spread across the structure. It was taken off the top. Something between the topmost courses of stone and the crowning capstone was removed. And what is left is that flat platform where a razor-sharp point should be. And here is the first thing that should make you uncomfortable. This was noticed a very, very long time ago. When Greek and Roman visitors described the pyramids in antiquity, some of them were already looking at a monument that did not come to a clean point. The pyramid has stood beheaded for so much of recorded history that the moment it lost its crown is lost with it. We are not investigating a recent theft. We are investigating a disappearance so old that the witnesses who could have told us what happened have been dead for 2,000 years. So what was actually up there? To answer that, you have to understand two separate things that both went missing. Because the story of the vanished summit is really the story of two losses stacked on top of each other. The first loss was the skin. The second loss was the crown. And they did not happen at the same time, or for the same reason. Start with the skin. The pyramid you see today, all those rough-stepped blocks, was never meant to be visible. That is the core, the internal masonry, the engine block. Over that entire surface, all four faces, from base to peak, the Egyptians laid a smooth outer casing of fine white limestone quarried at Tura, across the Nile. These casing stones were cut with a precision that still stops engineers cold. They were polished flat, angled to the exact slope of the pyramid, and fitted so tightly that you could not slide a knife blade into the seam between them. When the sun hit them, the entire structure did not look like a pile of stone. It looked like a single, seamless, blinding white, geometric form rising out of the desert. Ancient Egyptians had a name for the Great Pyramid. They called it Ikhet. It translates to something like the glorious light. That was not poetry. That was a description of what the thing physically did. It caught the sun and threw it back so brightly it could be seen for miles. A mountain of light standing on the edge of the desert. Now here is where it gets strange. That gleaming skin, that mirror-smooth casing, is almost entirely gone. Only a handful of original casing stones survive, hidden at the very base, protected for centuries under mounds of sand and rubble. Everything else, millions of tons of finely dressed white limestone, was stripped away, and the standard explanation for that is not a mystery at all. It is a crime scene, and we largely know the culprits. In the year 1303, a massive earthquake struck the region. The Great Pyramid did not fall, but the quake loosened thousands of those casing stones across its faces. And to the rulers of medieval Cairo, a mountain of pre-cut, pre-polished, perfectly dressed white limestone sitting a few miles away was not a sacred wonder. It was a free quarry. Over the following decades, the loosened casing was carted off into the growing city. Stones from the Great Pyramid were hauled away to build mosques and fortresses in Cairo. Later, in the early 19th century, more was taken again for grand construction projects in the capital. The most magnificent surface ever laid by human hands was dismantled and recycled into the walls of a city, one cartload at a time. The pyramid was not destroyed by time alone. It was quarried by people who lived in its shadow and saw building material where their ancestors had seen the horizon of a king. And when Western explorers first came to Giza in numbers, their earliest reports describe exactly what you would expect from a stripped monument. Huge mounds of rubble heaped around the base of the pyramid, the debris of casing that had spalled, cracked, and been pried loose over centuries. The Great Pyramid was, for a long stretch of its later life, its own scrapyard, shedding its skin into the sand, until people came to haul the best of it away. The transformation was total. A structure that was engineered to look like a single, flawless white crystal became a rough, tiered, sand-colored heap. Same stones underneath, same geometry. But the face of it, the thing that made it the glorious light, was carried off into a city. That accounts for the skin. Strip the casing, and you lower the height, you expose the rough core, and you turn a mirror into the brown staircase tourists photograph today. But the casing being gone does not fully explain the flat top, because at the very apex, above even the casing, there was supposed to be one more stone, a special one, and that is the second loss, and the one nobody can close the book on. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, subscribe and turn on the bell, because what that final stone was, and what it was for, is the part the tour guides never tell you. The stone that crowns a pyramid has a name. It is called a pyramidion. In Egyptian, the benben, or benbenet. It was a miniature pyramid, a scale model of the whole structure, carved as a single block and set at the very summit as the final piece. And it was not an afterthought. In the mind of an ancient Egyptian, the pyramidion was the most important stone in the entire monument. Everything below it, all 2 million blocks, all that engineering, existed to lift that one stone into the sky. Here is why. The pyramidion was tied directly to the oldest and deepest creation story in Egyptian religion. In the belief system centered on the city of Heliopolis, before there was land, before there was light, there was only none. the dark, endless water. And out of that water rose the very first thing that ever existed, a single mound of earth called the Benben. On that first mound, the first light of the sun fell. Creation began at that point. The word itself comes from a root meaning to shine, to rise. The Benben was the birthplace of existence, the spot where the sun touched the world for the very first time. There was a bird tied to that first mound, too. In the story, a heron-like bird called the Bennu flew over the dark water at the very beginning and landed on the Benben, and its first cry broke the silence of creation. That bird is the ancestor of the phoenix, the creature that dies and is reborn from itself forever. The Egyptians said the Bennu lived on the Benben stone, kept in its own sanctuary at Heliopolis, the house of the Benben, the holiest object the sun cult owned. The original stone vanished from that temple long ago, and the temple itself now lies buried under the suburbs of modern Cairo. But its shape did not die. It survived as the pyramidion, the crown of every pyramid and every obelisk in Egypt. So the stone at the top of the Great Pyramid was not just a peak. It was a copy of the birthplace of the world, the perch of the bird of rebirth, the point where the first light of the first morning was said to have touched the earth. And the pyramidion at the top of every pyramid was a physical model of that first mound, the place where the light lands first. This is why the summit stone mattered more than anything beneath it. The entire pyramid was a machine for one purpose in the religious sense: to raise that sacred point as high as possible, to be the first thing the rising sun struck each morning and the last thing it left each night. The pyramid was the mountain. The pyramidion was the peak of creation itself, lifted 146 m into the Egyptian sky. Now hold that idea, because the mainstream reading treats all of this as symbolism, as religion, as decoration. And that is where the interpretation may be incomplete. Because the Egyptians did not build symbolism out of ordinary material. They chose the pyramidion stone with obsessive care. And what they chose tells a different story than ornament. That is the first clue. And it is sitting in a museum in Cairo right now, where you can walk up and look at it. Here is the problem with investigating the Great Pyramid's missing capstone. There is no capstone to examine. It is gone. So for over a century, skeptics had an easy escape hatch. Maybe there never was one. Maybe the builders simply stopped short. Maybe the flat top is not a wound at all, just an unfinished job. And you cannot disprove that by staring at an empty platform. Except we are not limited to the Great Pyramid, because other pyramidions survived, and one of them changes everything. In the year 1900, the director of Egypt's Antiquities Service sent an inspection team south to Dashur, to a crumbling mud brick pyramid known today as the Black Pyramid, built for a later pharaoh named Amenemhat III. The pyramid itself was a ruin, but on the eastern flank, sticking up out of the desert sand, the team found a dark, polished block. They dug it out, and what came out of the sand was almost perfect. It was the pyramidion, the actual capstone of that pyramid, buried and preserved for nearly 4,000 years. Look at what it is. It is carved from a single piece of dark, dense stone, described as basalt or black granite, one of the hardest materials the Egyptians ever worked. It stands about 1.4 m tall, roughly 4.6 feet, with a base around 1.85 m wide. It weighs about 4.5 tons. 4.5 tons, hauled to the very top of a pyramid and set in place as the final stone. And its surface is not blank. It is covered in inscriptions: a winged sun disk, sacred eyes, symbols invoking the sun god. The stone was designed to catch the first light of dawn, and its carvings speak directly to the sun. Not a myth, not a metaphor, a real, physical 4.5-ton crown, cut from the hardest stone available, carved with solar symbols, and set at the summit of a pyramid. And it is not the only one. Another survives from a pharaoh named Kenjer, also in black granite, also in the Cairo Museum. Together, they form the largest collection of pyramid capstones on Earth, and they prove beyond argument that yes, these monuments were crowned. The flat top of the Great Pyramid is not unfinished. It is stripped, and that raises the obvious question about Khufu's pyramid, the biggest of them all. If a later, smaller pyramid got a 4.5-ton carved black crown, what sat on top of the greatest pyramid ever built? And what happened to it? Here is where the mainstream and the strange part of this story split. The safe answer is theft. The pyramidion of the Great Pyramid was the single most valuable and most exposed stone on the entire structure. Perched at the very top, a sacred object, possibly plated in gold or in electrum, a natural blend of gold and silver that the Egyptians prized for exactly this kind of solar symbolism. A gilded stone catching the sun at the highest point in the ancient world. To a thief, that is not a religious artifact. That is the richest, most reachable treasure on the monument. Climb to the top, pry it loose, and it is yours. The standard explanation is simply that it was looted in antiquity, so early that by the time historians were writing things down, the pyramid was already headless. And that might be true, but notice what the theft explanation quietly skips over. A pyramidion the scale of the surviving ones weighs several tons. You do not slip a 4.5-ton block of granite into a bag and walk down a 146 slope with it. Removing it would have been a major operation. And if the goal was only the gold, why take the whole stone, strip the gilding, and leave the block? Yet there is no shattered pyramidion at the base of the Great Pyramid. No fragments identified as its crown. The most important stone in the structure did not just lose its gold. It vanished completely, so thoroughly that we cannot even say for certain what it was made of, how big it was, or whether it was ever set in place at all. That is the gap the official story leaves open. And it is the master question of this entire investigation. What was actually on top of the Great Pyramid, and where did it go? Not the casing. We know where the casing went. The crown. The one stone the whole monument was built to lift. Hold on to that question, because everything that follows sharpens it, and nothing answers it. That is clue number 2. The third is the one that turns a question about a missing stone into a question about what the Egyptians actually understood. Because the choice of material is not random, and it is not only about value. Look again at what the surviving pyramidions are made of. Not the soft local limestone the Egyptians had in unlimited supply right next to their building sites. They reached for the hardest, densest, darkest stone they could find. Basalt, granite, stone that is brutal to cut, brutal to move, brutal to carve. And they lifted it to the single most difficult place to build anywhere on the structure. The tiny working platform at the very summit, where there is barely room to stand. The mainstream reading says this was about prestige and permanence. Hard stone lasts, hard stone honors the king. And that is reasonable, but it is the same pattern that runs through the entire pyramid. The same refusal to take the easy path when an easy path was right there. The Egyptians consistently chose the hardest possible stone for the most symbolically charged parts of their monuments, hauled it impossible distances, and worked it with a precision we still struggle to reproduce with the tools they had. Copper tools. No iron, no steel. And yet these capstones are cut clean, their angles true, their faces polished, their inscriptions crisp. Connect that to the geology and the astronomy, and the picture gets sharper. A pyramidion is a 4-sided pointed stone aligned to the cardinal directions set at the apex of a structure whose sides face true north, south, east, and west with astonishing accuracy. It is positioned to receive sunlight at the exact geometric peak of a solar monument. The Egyptians did not stumble into that. They engineered it. The capstone was the aiming point of the entire design, the place where geometry, astronomy, geology, and religion all converged into a single block of stone. And on the Great Pyramid, the largest and most precise of them all, That convergence point is exactly the thing that is missing. So think about what was lost when that stone disappeared. Not just gold, not just a decorative tip. We lost the one piece that would tell us what the builders considered the summit of their achievement to be. We lost the keystone of their intent. The pyramid is a sentence with the final word torn out. Now, let me bring in the modern confirmation, because this is not all ancient sources and interpretation. Modern surveying has been able to reconstruct what is gone with real precision. By measuring the exact slope of the surviving structure, roughly 51 degrees and 50 minutes, and projecting those four faces upward to where they would have met, engineers can calculate precisely where the original apex stood and how much is missing. The flat platform at the top today is not the design. It sits well below the true original point. The projected apex reaches to that 146.6 m figure, while the surviving summit falls short by that missing 8 m and more. In other words, we can stand on the flat top, look at empty air above our heads, and calculate exactly where the vanished crown once cut the sky. The missing piece has a precise address. It is just empty. And the surviving casing stones give us the second piece of hard confirmation. The few that remain, protected at the base, still carry that mirror polish and that razor-fitted precision. Measure them, and you can confirm what the whole surface once was: a seamless, gleaming, reflective skin. The reconstruction is not guesswork. It is projection from real, measurable, surviving stone. We know what it looked like. We know how tall it was. We know it was crowned, and we know the crown is gone. Here is where the story takes on the texture of every great unsolved mystery. Because when you go looking for the definitive record of the Great Pyramid's capstone, you find silence exactly where you would expect answers. There is no surviving contemporary Egyptian description of the Great Pyramid's pyramidion being set in place. No drawing of it. No fragment confidently identified as its crown. The most documented, most studied, most measured building in human history has a blank space at its most important point, and the record simply stops there. The stone that mattered most left the least evidence. For a civilization that carved its intentions into everything, that obsessively inscribed its monuments, the total absence of the Great Pyramid's crown from the record is its own kind of clue. It was found by no one. It was recorded by no one. It was simply, at some unknown point deep in antiquity, gone. Now, does this prove the most extreme version of the story? The version where the golden capstone was some kind of device, an energy collector, a key that switched on a machine hidden in the stone? Probably not. Let me be honest about that, because the truth here deserves better than hype. The mainstream explanation carries real weight, and it deserves to be stated plainly. The casing stones really were stripped for building material after the 1303 earthquake, and we can point to the mosques and fortresses of Cairo. A gilded or valuable capstone really would have been the first and most obvious thing a looter would take, which is a perfectly ordinary reason for it to be missing. Pyramidions really were symbolic objects rooted in the sun cult and the Ben creation story, and that religious meaning explains the care and the material without any need for lost technology. The most sensational claims that the stone caught cosmic energy, that gold on the summit powered something below, come from a British visitor's much-repeated story about a small electric shock felt at the summit long after the pyramid was already a bare-topped ruin. And that anecdote is a long, long way from a working machine. Nobody has ever produced the Great Pyramid's capstone, tested it, or shown it did anything but sit there and shine. Strip away the wild theories, and there is no proof of ancient electricity on that summit. But here is what the grounded, skeptical view still cannot make ordinary. Strip away every fantastic claim, and the plain facts left standing are stranger than the fantasy. They sheathed an entire mountain in a mirror of white limestone so bright they named the building the Glorious Light. and they aimed the whole structure at the sun and the cardinal points with an accuracy that modern instruments confirm. They built the tallest thing humans would make for the next 3,800 years, and they crowned it with a stone that represented the birthplace of creation. You do not need a power plant to be unsettled by that. You just need to look at what is actually there and at the one piece that is not. And if even the modest version of this is true, it means something uncomfortable about the story we tell ourselves. It means the most famous building on Earth is not intact and never has been in living memory. It means we have been photographing a stripped, beheaded skeleton and calling it a wonder, and the actual wonder, the gleaming crowned mountain of light, no living person has ever seen. It means our picture of the ancient world is not a finished portrait. It is a sketch with the most important piece rubbed out. And if we cannot even say for certain what crowned the most studied monument on the planet, or where it went, then how much of the ancient world are we simply guessing at? Because think about what that missing stone represented to the people who built it. It was not the least important part of the pyramid. It was the most important. It was the point of the entire thing in every sense of that word. Everything below it, every ton of stone, every year of labor, every calculation existed to lift that one block into the light. And it is the one piece that did not survive. The pyramid kept its 2 million ordinary stones and lost its single sacred one. The vault stands. The crown is missing. There is a final detail that will not let go. Of the 3 Great Pyramids at Giza, the second one, built for Khufu's successor, still wears a cap of its original casing stones near its summit, a patch of the old smooth skin clinging to the top like the last of a melting snow. Stand on the plateau and you can see it. On that one pyramid, you can still see a fragment of how all of them were meant to look. Smooth, sealed, finished. It is a preview and an accusation at the same time. A surviving scrap of the vanished perfection, pointing straight at everything the Great Pyramid has lost. So where is the crown of the Great Pyramid? We do not know. It was not recorded. It was not found. It was not left behind in fragments at the base. The single most meaningful stone the Egyptians ever raised, the model of the first mound of creation, the peak that was built to catch the first light of every dawn, is simply gone. And it has been gone for so long that the answer may have died with the ancient world itself. The casing we can trace into the walls of a city. The crown leads nowhere. The Great Pyramid is still standing on the Giza Plateau, exactly where it has stood since before the first word of recorded history was written. Millions of people walk past it every year and see a mountain of stone stepping up to a point. But there is no point. There is a flat, empty platform where the most sacred stone in Egypt was meant to burn in the sun, and above it, nothing but air where the crown of creation once cut the sky. It was built to shine. It was built to be seen from the edge of the world, and the one stone that was supposed to finish it, to switch the whole vision on, is missing, and no one alive has ever laid eyes on it. It is out there somewhere, or it is dust, and the summit waits, flat and bare, exactly as it has for longer than anyone can remember.